All right, it's official. We're started. So I think I do have a Kahoot for the material that we went over last time around. So if you want to pull out your device, we'll run through it quick anyway. Let's see, share screen. It's not exactly what you guys need to see. What am I doing wrong there? Yeah, I don't know. That's not.
Oh, it's an apple. That's the problem.
I don't even know where that one came from. Okay, I'm getting there. Do we need to turn a light off or can you see it like that? Okay. Hey there. Good. How are you? All right, there's the pin. What do you guys want, on or off?
Oh, thank you.
You got to look at the screen to figure out which color to hit. Do the front one maybe.
That's our only choice. That's the front ones.
These give me a bit of a gauge as far as how much people are retaining, and I also think I need to make the tests harder. Everybody did really, really good last week. So, is this all of us that are going to sign in? No, no. I think that's all of us. I'll get going. Hopefully, I did the right one. All right, good. I'll buzz through these a little bit quicker. Awesome. Okay. We didn't talk a whole lot about that, but yeah, if you don't use foundation, the bees will build the comb however they want. And there are frames, and I think we did talk about the foundationless frames that have a little edge, and they'll follow that edge, but sometimes they'll get a mind of their own and not follow that. So
I think a good example, I brought one, a screen bottom board into Sioux Center. And it's on my Facebook group, but the queen came out for some reason and went underneath. And I thought they were putting honey in, so I didn't know she was not in the deeps until one day I was like, something's wrong. I looked it up and it was just beautiful. I mean, they were just any way they wanted to go, inside the cinder blocks and attached to the
Oh,
screen.
yeah, I
It
saw
was
that.
gorgeous.
Yeah, even down in the cinder
Work.
blocks. Yeah, yeah.
I like that one.
All right. Actually, I probably, uh, all of those are probably true, depending on who you are. Here we go.
Brilliant.
All right. They're hard to read up there, aren't they? Sorry. Good. And I have seen packages come in 2 weeks early. Usually they're late, but I have seen them come in early. So you don't want to be putting your equipment together the night that you're supposed to go pick up the packages the next day. Awesome. Okay, cool. Yep, next year I need to make harder questions. 'Cause you guys are all, you're doing really good. Yeah. There we go. Cool. All right. Okay. So, how many of you got all the way through the Google Slides for this week? Pretty much everybody. Good. Okay. So, we'll buzz through them. I should probably start at the beginning instead of the end. So, how many of you are getting nukes? Okay. Anybody getting packages? Okay. All right. So, Dwayne used to say that people gave him a hard time when he taught a class and then he arranged for him to get nukes because getting a package should be part of that ritual of first time beekeeper. But there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to both. But something I like to stress is again, make sure you have everything ready to go well in advance of getting your bees, whether it's a package or a nuke. And the same thing is true before you're going to install the nuke or install the package. Make sure that the hive is set up where it's going to be permanently and all of the equipment is in there. Because when you get your bees, especially the first time, you're going to be a little bit overwhelmed. You're going to forget something. Just, one or two fewer things to have to try and remember when you've got thousands of bees buzzing around you all of a sudden. You're going to be a lot better off. So make sure you've got things lined up ahead of time. Make sure you've got some backups, rubber bands, wire, duct tape, you name it. You never know what you're going to need. So I really did, and what I put on these slides is true. My first time, I'd never been in a beehive before, and I shook some bees in the box and I pulled the cork out because growing up as a kid, there was somebody who came around and talked about beekeeping, and there was this certain cage that the queen was in, right? And you pulled the cork out and there was candy behind it. And I pulled the cork out, there's no candy, and there's the queen staring at me, literally eye to eye. And I didn't know what to do. And I just put the cage in the box and shook the bees on it and crossed my fingers. I didn't even think of putting the cork back in there and coming back later. So you never know what you might do or what you might be thinking in the heat of the moment. Usually you want to leave the cork in or make sure that there's candy because the package bees might not be used to that queen yet. So they might not have adjusted to her pheromone. They might not recognize her as their queen. And this is true if you have to requeen a hive too. You've got a queen in a cage and you go to install that into a hive that is queenless. They know they're queenless, but they still don't recognize this queen. So you want to put that cage in there. I recommend that it's in there 3 days before you even pull the cork out, because sometimes they can go through that candy pretty fast. So in my case, the package took a while to get there, and the bees had been accustomed to that queen and everything worked out fine, but that's not always going to be the case. I'm going to pass this package around just so you get a feel for what one looks like. And there are queen cages in there. And two things: practice pouring those out, because that's what you end up having to do with the bees to get the last of the bees out. And a lot of times you'll need to bounce the corner on the ground so all the bees go in that corner. And then with the bees all in that corner, you tip it so they fall out the hole. It's surprising, but it takes practice to do it. And the bees tend to cling. So pass that around and try that. The other thing I wanted to pass around is these plastic queen cages. You really don't want to have to learn how to open and close one of these in a panic situation or when you're overwhelmed with bees. Especially this version that I've got here, they are hard to open. Yeah, somebody else can have to open that, and then you all can see how it works then. This pops out. Get a thumbnail under there to open it, or somebody's got a tool. Okay. So what's the significance? What's important about it takes 21 days for bees to hatch when you're dealing with a package? Somebody explain back to me what you've learned about this. So if the bees are dying off after 4 to 6 weeks, and it takes 3 weeks to get any new bees from the package, then you've got 3 weeks of bees dying before a single one hatches. And you really will notice the population on your package going down fast until it levels off and starts to take off again. So that's something to keep in mind. So a nuke doesn't do that, and there's a little more detail on that later. So somebody then explained me timing on putting a nuke, or putting a package in a hive. What are some things to consider as far as temperature and time that you've learned? Above 50, yep, yep. Not windy can help, not rainy, yeah, yeah. So a package, you can put a package of bees in your garage and you can keep them in there 3-4 days if you had to, maybe a week. I mean, you have to keep spraying some sugar syrup on the screen to make sure they're fed. That can that comes in there will run out at some point, and you can't really lift the can and tell how much is in it, because when you lift the can, the bees can get out. But if you spray sugar syrup on the screen, the bees will come and lick it off. And if they don't pay much attention to it, then you know that you're keeping them pretty well fed. So I've seen that happen too, where packages come in and it's rainy and 41 degrees for 3 or 4 or 5 days. So keep them in a back porch maybe that's a little warmer. I guess you could put them in your basement. I've had them in my basement, I will admit. Generally, there's no holes in the package and they won't get out. But if you're keeping them fed, you can hold them in the package for a while if you have to. But they would do better in a hive. So yeah, if you've got a window of 6 hours where it's going to be 50 and the sun is shining, that's definitely enough to get them into the hive and let them start getting established. Then they can start working. They can start drawing out comb. You can feed them all the sugar syrup they can take in. So some people recommend that you do it late in the afternoon so that they're in that hive all night long, and then they're more accustomed to it and they're less likely to leave the next day. I think if it's going to be nice and warm and you can wait, sure. If that would deter you from maybe getting them installed for a day or two, I'd say put them in whenever it's warm enough. Don't worry too much about the overnight thing. You don't need to use smoke when you're installing a package. It actually kind of interferes because when you shake, if you're really good at it, you'll get the bees, almost all of them shaken down into the hive. But some of them are going to fly up, and sometimes a lot of them are going to fly up, and they're going to fly all over the place, and they have no idea where to go except for they'll smell the Nasanov scent that the other bees are fanning at the entrance. And if you're using smoke, that can interfere and just make it take a little bit longer for the bees to find their way into the new home. And usually packages aren't aggressive, so smoke isn't too necessary anyway. I mean, I'd still wear a bee suit, but you wouldn't need to worry so much about smoke. Have you watched any videos on installing packages? One trend I notice on the videos is they just spray the heck out of them with sugar syrup. I think most people overspray them. If it's warm, I guess they're going to be okay, but if it's cold, I wouldn't spray them as much as I see people doing on YouTube. Just to keep that in mind. So the picture here shows, you've got most of the frames out, so you've made some room for those bees. Put one frame in the center, attach the queen cage, and that's another thing. The queen cages that are going around, you can see some of them had a metal strip. You can use that to staple it to the frame. Sometimes it's plastic. You might need duct tape or something, but get the queen cage attached to a frame so that the screen is out so the bees can feed her, and then start pouring bees over the top of that. Maybe put a frame alongside of it or a couple of frames and shake the bees on top of the frames. Once you've got all the bees shaken in, then you can put the rest of the frames in slowly, put the lid on, close it up. If you leave the package up against the entrance for like the stragglers to find their way in, you want to pay attention to it after a couple of hours, because the queen's been hanging in that cage in that one spot in that box, and the queen pheromone can be in the box, and some of the stragglers, or sometimes a lot of the stragglers, will end up going back in the box. So if you see that happening, you want to shake all of them out that you can and put the box in the garage or somewhere where they can't get to it. I think even after dark, if you're not having that problem after dark, I think you still want to shake the rest of the bees out and put it somewhere where they can't get to it. It's not going to do them any good the next day. It's just going to distract them. Like I said before, I recommend that you leave the cork in for about 3 days, then go back and take the cork out. You're not inspecting them. You really don't want to disturb them any more than you have to until they've started raising some brood. So it's just a quick open it up, pull one frame out, make yourself just enough space to get to the queen cage or get that frame out, pull the cork out, expose the candy, put the frame back in, put it all back together. So then 6 or 7 days after you pull the cork out, then you can go back in and you can start looking for eggs, see if the queen is laying any eggs yet, see if things are going the way that they expected, make sure the queen is still there. Okay, I think we've talked about most of this. Anybody have any trouble or not sure if they understood any of the package part of the slides? All good? Okay. Anybody learn anything surprising or anything that you didn't expect? We haven't talked a whole lot about the resources that it takes to draw out comb. So, the foundation that we use just gets them a start, but you've got 20 frames. If you're brand new, you've got 20 frames that they haven't drawn any wax out on. So you can end up feeding sugar syrup for a long time to get them to fill out all of those boxes. Um, even if you've got 1 or 2 hives, you're probably going to want to buy what are the bigger bags of sugar? 25. I mean, I usually buy them by 25-pound bags and they go through them pretty quick. If you could probably get by with the 10-pound bags, but you're going to end up buying quite a few 10-pound bags by the time they've drawn all the comb out. I just usually get it at Walmart. Anybody else know good places for sugar? Sam's. Okay. Yep. Sam's has got a little bit bigger bag or a little bit.
It's the same, 25 pounds.
It's 25. Okay. Okay. Yep. Sure. So as far as mixing it up, in the springtime, we usually feed 1-to-1. So 1 part sugar to 1 part water.
By weight.
By weight. Thank you. Yep. Not by volume, but by weight. I usually don't really measure too much. You'll get a feel for it. In this,
Believe it or not, 5 pounds of sugar will go in a 5-gallon cardboard. 25 pounds of sugar.
25 pounds of
Into like a
sugar.
blue bottle like that one right there, on the water cooler. 25 pounds of sugar in there and fill it up the rest of the way is 1-to-1.
Okay.
If I want smaller, I usually go
Pint to a pound. Yep.
so 10-pound bags could be a little over a gallon.
Little over 8 pounds per gallon of water. So
Yeah.
that's how much water you need in
Yep.
relation to the sugar.
So 1-to-1 is recommended in the spring because it's thinner and it simulates a nectar flow. So some of the things that bees do in a nectar flow is they draw out wax or they draw out comb. They start raising baby bees, raising more brood. The queen starts laying more. So you want to feed the thinner in the spring because you want them to think it's nectar that's coming in. You want them to increase. And I mentioned it before, you want to think about timing and stuff. So let's say we have a warm spell in January. You feed them 1-to-1 sugar syrup. You want the queen to start raising a bunch of baby bees in January. Because when we have a cold snap later, they have to keep all those baby bees warm. And if they can't, they'll spread themselves too thin and they can freeze because they've got too much brood. So you want to think, why do we feed sugar syrup in the spring? Well, one of the things is to stimulate that brood rearing. We don't want to do that in January. So that's why we feed like the sugar bricks, the fondant candy or dry sugar, things like that when there's still a chance it's going to get cold again. And as far as stirring them up, you'll see a lot of recipes to boil the water and put the sugar in and boil it for so long. It's really easy to scorch the sugar and that will hurt the bees. And it is totally not necessary to heat it to get it to dissolve. I use a 5-gallon bucket in the back porch, pour the sugar in. I will heat the water so it's warm water at least, but I have a paint stirrer on a drill and I run that for a little bit and I walk away. An hour or so later, I come back, I do it again. And I do that about 6 times and it's dissolved.
I just use hot water out of the
Dean uses hot water out of the tap. You use hot water out of the tap. Yeah. So you really can scorch it, heating it, and actually kill the bees. And the other thing is hot sugar syrup is really dangerous. You spill it on something, it sticks and it takes a long time to cool and it's not worth it. I saw Cayman Reynolds video just recently where he's making his sugar bricks by putting the sugar in a 5-gallon bucket. I don't remember the ratio. It's only a cup of water. And then he uses one of those paint stirrers on a drill in the dry sugar. And the next thing you know, it looks like cotton candy or like sand at the beach, and pack it in whatever. And you've got your sugar bricks. Here, I've been stirring them up by hand and doing different things that never worked really well. And I'm going to try that next time. Any questions on packages? So most of you are getting nukes. Why did you decide to go with nukes? Anybody? Sure. You got one of each, so. Didn't know. Sure. Sure. Okay. So when I got started, somebody gave me the advice of order a nuke from one place and a package from another place. one, you've got some comparison, and two, if one guy falls through, you've got the other one. So that's not a bad idea, one of each. Yeah. How come you got nukes? Convenience or? Okay, okay. Okay, yeah. So nukes are further along. Sometimes we don't get them as early as packages. Um, so a nuke usually has 3 to 5 frames with a laying queen. You've got bees of all stages. You got eggs, you got larvae, you got capped brood. Where's that slide? So a 3-pound package has around 10,000 bees. And we talked about they're going to be dying off for 3 weeks until some new bees start emerging. A 4-frame nuke has around 6,400 adult bees. It also has around 14,400 eggs, larvae, and capped brood. So that capped brood is going to emerge within 3 weeks, and population doesn't decline. So yeah, a nuke can be a boost in population and get things off and running. Like I said, though, around here we usually see nukes later than packages. So yes, it's a boost, but it's a boost a little bit later. So sometimes there's a trade-off there too. Um, as far as installing a nuke, it couldn't be any simpler as far as physically relocating them. If you got big hands, you can get 2, 3 frames at a time and just move them into the new equipment, keep the frames in the same order that they're in. Um, you're usually getting nukes in the springtime and we still have cold nights, so I wouldn't suggest that you put an empty frame in the middle of them. But if you happen to get a nuke in the summertime and it's plugged up, clear full of capped brood, you could put an empty drawn frame or an empty foundationless frame in between the frames to get them to draw it out faster and get them to expand. There is a potential sometimes when you get a nuke that they're so full that they could swarm. Like if you're delayed in putting them into a hive, they run out of space in a 5-frame nuke pretty quick. So that is something to consider.
Outside of your nuke, what's the ideal frame? Whatever's available, what's ideal?
So as far as arranging the frames, you want to keep the 4 or 5 original frames together in the center of the hive. And then if all you have is undrawn foundation, then you just fill up the outside with that. If you've got drawn frames or drawn frames that are full of capped honey, I would say there's a little bit of a consideration. What time is it? How cold is it? How full is this nuke? If the nuke's really, really full and it's staying above 40 at night, I would say put a drawn frame on each side, or at least one side of the nuke frames, and then your capped honey outside of that. So a drawn frame will give your queen a place to lay right away. So if she's running out of places to lay, they might start building swarm cells. So yeah, if it's warm enough, I'd put a drawn unused frame alongside of them. If it's still getting cold, I'd put capped honey alongside of them because they'll use it, and then once they've used it, that opens up the space for the queen to lay in. If you don't, a new,
Better than,
no, no, not necessarily. No, if you've got a drawn frame with capped honey in it, you can go ahead and put that right alongside of the nuke frames. If you were concerned that they're so full that they might start raising queen cells, then I'd say put a foundationless frame right alongside of it. But that's probably an exception. You probably aren't going to get one late enough in the year that's that full. So you can put the honey frame in there, and like I said, as they eat that honey, then the queen will start laying in those open cells. So yeah. I like the idea when you're getting a nuke, have your hive set up, set the nuke box when you get home with it, set it on top of the hive with the entrance facing the direction of the new hive entrance. Open up the little door on the nuke so that the bees can fly. I don't recommend that you drive them home from wherever and install them right away, because in my experience, once you move bees and you open up the entrance, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to be really, really calm, or they're going to be really, really mad. So err on the side of caution, open up the entrance, let them fly. What'll happen is, since it's on top of the new location, when you move the frames down, now you want them to use the new entrance on the bottom. The bees that are flying will come back and they'll notice that the nuke box isn't there, and they'll spiral around and they'll find the new entrance. Another good way of doing it is just put the bottom board where you're going to set up the new hive, put the nuke box on the bottom board. Same thing, entrance pointing the right way, open up the door, let them fly. If it's 55 and sunny, when you're installing the nuke, you can actually look at the frames, make sure that there's eggs and larvae and capped brood and everything that should be in it when you're installing them. If it's 40 degrees, I'd say just move the frames, get them in there as quick as you can, and let them start setting up shop in the new equipment. Make sure that I'm not skipping over anything real important. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about mixing up sugar syrup. We'll talk about some options for feeding. Whether you're getting a package or getting a nuke, you're going to want to feed them. I like these hive top feeders. This is a version that Dadant sells. There's a lot of different versions out there. The bees come up through the center, and then there's two containers where you can put the sugar syrup here. The wood floats. I don't find too many dead bees in these. The other option is the black plastic frame that goes down in between the frames. Back up to that one. So that, and you pour the sugar syrup in the center of that. They usually have a screen in the center or a ladder or something. I do see a lot of drowned bees in these. I don't like them, but I use them when I have to, or I use them because I have them. But yeah, you will see some drowned bees in these. Another option, in an emergency, just a sheet of newspaper over the frames and dry sugar. Or dry sugar and a spray bottle of water, put a little bit of water on it. But the bees can utilize this in the spring when it's cold, when they couldn't utilize syrup, because the syrup itself needs to be 50 degrees or better before they can really get much good out of it. These jar feeders at the entrance are one that I really don't recommend. They always tend to leak. They're right at the entrance, so other bees outside of the hive can smell the sugar syrup leaking. And when they find it, the entrance is right there. And if the bees inside are not as strong as some of the other hives, then they'll get robbed out, taken advantage of, and it can kill the whole hive. Another thing I don't recommend is open feeding, where you just chicken water or some kind of device and just out in the open and let all of the bees feed. When it runs out, then they know, well, there should be something around here, and they'll find a weak hive and rob it. So and a lot of people don't recommend open feeding. In some states, I'm not sure about Iowa, I don't think it's technically legal to open feed bees in Iowa. I don't know who's going to enforce that on you, but open feed. So any questions on nukes or feeding at this point? Does everybody have a feeder lined up or have a plan? No? But you guys, what are you going to use? The hive top? Yep. Okay. And then I've got one of these I got at a bee meeting, like a silent auction thing. And I like these. But if you had a whole bunch of them, they might be a little bit difficult to store. Whereas the hive top feeder, you just stack them up like you do bee boxes. They're a lot easier to store. But these do work good, and you don't get drowned bees in them. And a mason jar, the same setup, a mason jar with some holes poked in the lid, and then you turn it upside down over the frames and put an extra box around it. That works too. Knowing when to stop can be difficult. If your bees are drawing out foundation and you still have undrawn frames, definitely it's safe to keep feeding them. If you get to the point where there's about 8 frames drawn, that's probably the time to add the second box. And if that second box is now got 8 out of the 10 frames drawn, that's probably time to stop feeding. Let them start bringing in nectar and take it from there. I have seen beginners feed and feed and feed, and the hive will end up swarming because you can feed them enough that they'll run out of space and they'll swarm, just like if they were bringing in honey and ran out of room. So it can happen. Okay. This is just a chart that I added from Bee Informed Partnership. We haven't talked a whole lot about mites yet. This is the results that they got from 2022 Varroa samples compared to all years. And I'm not sure how many years it is, but you can see there's almost 10,000 samples in the years. So you can see last year was a little lower, but look at that buildup. That's pretty typical what we see every year of mites. And keep in mind, this is nationwide. So places down south, bees are brooding up a lot sooner than they are here. We probably don't see our mites bump up in March or April, but definitely in May and definitely August. I would say around here, ours peak sooner. I just realized these are peaking out in October. And ours, I think, probably peak August or September. But at any rate, it goes from not a whole lot of mites to a whole lot of mites really quick. And that's just the life cycle. And I've showed you before that the bee population is coming down at the same time that the mite population is going up. So now you've got more mites and fewer bees, which means you've got more mites per bee, which gets things to be a lot harder. Any questions on any of that before we move on? Phil, do you want to come up and do yours? So Phil Westra is going to talk about mites and mite monitoring and treating. And while we're at it, Phil, do you still have nukes for sale if anybody's looking? You're sold out. Okay. All right. So I want to get to. There we go. Now I just need to find your presentation for you.
So how many did you have to sell?
I sold 35.
35. Good.
Everybody should have gotten 2 handouts. One's from Cornell University, Integrated Pest Management and Bromites, and then this one is my own document that you can use if you want to take it and adapt it, or it's just an example of someone's mite plan. So go ahead and.
I'm not sure how to run this. You is there a
Just hit play.
slideshow? Just hit play.
I think maybe.
Okay.
There we go.
Here you go.
I'll let you have it. All right. So I'm going to talk about Varroa management and Varroa mites. Again, my name is Philip Westra. I'm a sideline beekeeper. I keep colonies in Lyon County, Sioux County, and O'Brien County, and been beekeeping since 2015. And I raise my own queens and nucleus colonies and all of that sort of thing. And one of my ambitions is to rear genetics that are more and more mite resistant as I build my colonies. So I could go into a lot of detailed topics. I want to stay like, I just kept asking myself, what would I want a brand new beekeeper to know about Varroa management? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So what are Varroa and why does this matter? And I want to ask you this. What are Varroa? Why does this matter? Varroa are what? Yellow mites that do what? They harm the bees. They can kill the bees. Yeah, they feed off the bees. They spread disease. That's really, really important. I think a lot of the damage that happens to our colonies is actually the disease that the mites spread as well. And so why does this matter? You already said, because they will die if you don't take care of these. Varroa, and they're technically Varroa destructor is the name of the mite. They're parasitic mites that stress honeybee colonies by feeding on the developing pupa, the fat bodies of adult bees, and then they vector They're vectoring diseases within the colony. If not managed, they will often kill a colony. And so that's my way of kind of summarizing what you want to know about Varroa 101. The other thing it's really helpful to know is Varroa reproduce within the sealed brood of honeybee colonies. So as the bees are reproducing, the mites are reproducing in the reproducing bees. So this is why mite levels grow as the colonies grow. And so here's a very close-up shot of a honeybee. And if you notice on its back, you've got this reddish brownish oval. That's a Varroa mite. And so think about the size of Varroa mite versus size of a bee. It's been explained to me. Make a fist and put it on your body, and that's the size of the parasite on you. And imagine something the size of your fist feeding on your fat bodies and spreading diseases, and then going from you to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else. And that's a Varroa mite. Most of the Varroa mites that are in the hive are not visible like this. Often they will burrow themselves between the plates of the bee's abdomen on the underbelly of the bees. And so when you're actually seeing mites, it's a bad sign, because you shouldn't be noticing any of them. Here's an example of when let's say you're peeling two boxes apart. Often the bees will make some drone comb between the frames, and you'll break those open. Mites are really obvious to see in the pupa right there. There are actually 3 mites in this picture. The other mites are little white ones. Yeah. So the developing mites within the pupa start with this little white color. So we've got one up here and then one little one down here. I think I highlighted these 3 spots. So when you open a bee pupa and you see mites, you can maybe glance and see if there's these little white ones. That means they're actually developing, reproducing in that bee pupa. So that's just something to look for. The other thing that you'll notice, mites leave behind their poop, which is this little white color. And if you have a bee frame, often, your bee frame's sitting like in the hive, and if like debris and stuff fall on your frame, it'll collect in the bottom. But what you know, if it's mite, you actually flip it over and glance at it and look and see if the tops of any of the cells have any of this white stuff in it. And that's often the mite feces. And so I think this has a few spots in it. And if it wasn't dark, I'd pass this around. But you can glance at this frame a little bit later if you want to see what that looks like. But that's another evidence of Varroa in your colony. So I said they are stressors. And what I want you to think about is how colonies deal with stress. And when you multiply stressors, these impact each other. I think the big 3 enormous stressors on our honeybees right now are the pests and diseases. And I would put Varroa as the top pest and disease vector. But the other stressors are poor nutrition, limited sources of pollen and nectar, bad weather for foraging. And then there's toxins that get in the hives, chemicals from agriculture and environment. And then even high mite treatments have residual chemicals in them. And that's why we need to really think about how we use treatments and how to use them smart. We don't want to over-treat them, and we don't want to under-treat them. But think about this. Think about the fact that if you are not eating healthy, you're more susceptible to disease, right? Or if you are dealing with toxins in your environment, that'll make you less ready to fight disease. And if you're dealing with disease, all the healthy food you get, you're not going to get the full nutritional benefit of it. So this is like a 3-sided triangle. And so what's going on right now is the chemical businesses are saying, our chemicals aren't hurting your beehives, the Varroa are. And what a lot of beekeepers are noticing is that our colonies are lessening their ability to fight Varroa the more chemicals are in the environment. So it's a stressor that makes them not able to fight off the pests. If you have a healthy colony, they're going to defend themselves from wax moths. If you have a healthy colony, they're going to be able to deal with chalk brood. If you have, I've noticed when I had a colony that has a lot of hygienic behavior, so they can excavate the Varroa out and kick it out and keep Varroa mites managed on their own, is that when we had a dearth, the Varroa mite load went up, and once we had great nectar and pollen flow, the Varroa went back down to like way below threshold. In fact, it happened last year when I had a field day. I had this colony that had like 20 mites in the mite check. Like, okay, this is an example. I'm going to show everyone how to do a mite test. And so we went back like 3 weeks later, we did a mite wash, and there was like 1 or 2, like, oh, 0. There was nothing. So that colony actually recovered and fought mites on its own. And that's the genetics I'm trying to reproduce in the queens and the nukes and stuff. So I'm trying to look at those kind of traits and reproduce those kind of colonies. So think about stressors and think about the fact that one stressor can impact another stressor. Bad forage can impact how well they can fight off diseases, and poor nutrition. Like if you don't have good foraging, your bees are going to die, even if you keep your mites under level and you don't have toxins, right? Any of these can destroy your colony. So just think about that stressor. Disease vectoring. This is a very common disease that happens. Varroa mites vector deformed wing virus. There's actually a deformed ring virus A, B, and C are distinct things, but they all have this unique trait. The wings are not usable, and this bee will never be a forager. This bee will actually live a few days and then crawl out of the hive and jump out and die. Generally, they self-quarantine and kill themselves outside the hive after a while. But if you see deformed wings, you know that you've got viruses in your colony, and usually that means you have a high mite load. This is to show kind of how the mites reproduce in the comb. So what happens is the mites crawl into the larva stage right before they cap and right before it comes a pupa. The female mite will lay an egg of a male, and then egg of a female a couple days later, and an egg of another female a couple days later, and they all mate with each other, and that's how they reproduce within the brood. So it's in cap brood that the mites are actively reproducing. So when that brood emerges, that brood is weakened, and there's more mites that are going to go and populate the rest of the colony. And so that's why, as the brood increases, here's your bees and your brood, and your mite load increases behind it. This is a graph that I think you can find most places on the internet. I got it from Randy Oliver's website, Scientific Beekeeping. So here is an example of where when you have great peak of bees, and this is kind of matches our climate. This is June. You see the 6 mites per 100 bees in the first bar. Now the mite population is still growing as the bee rearing starts slowing down. And so it's that fall cross point where things start becoming very dangerous. And if you have 35 mites per 100 bees, well, think about running a business and 35 out of every 100 employees are sick. You're not going to do so well, right? And that's what the bee colony is. It's a food rearing and preserving business. They need to have efficiency. They need to use their population to gather nectar. And if they have disease, that's when the colony starts dying. And that's when the rest of them say, hey, all of our sisters are dying. We're just going to leave. And they abscond, and you have no bees left in your colony. So this is why it's important to kind of keep checking to see what the trends are. Like John's graph said, you kind of want to see how is it doing this month? How is it doing this month? And kind of get a sense of how quick things are growing. One of the websites I recommend is the Honeybee Health Coalition. If you go to that website, click on the resources button, and under that it has a section called Varroa Management. And you can get this, which I consider probably one of the best references. It's a 37-page PDF document that looks like this. This is a great tool. So this will tell you, I mean, it's updated, I think, usually yearly. What do they recommend for Varroa mite mitigation, things like that? What I handed out to you is a shorter, but I think very, very helpful guide done by Cornell University. Their College of Agriculture, Life Sciences on integrated pest management. And I think this is really the key way to key strategy for mite mitigation. Integrated pest management really means that you're taking multiple tools to try to deal with this pest. You're not just saying, oh, I have this pest, dump this chemical on it, hope that takes care of it. If you've ever done gardening, IPM is kind of based on agricultural stuff. So for example, if you are trying to raise a type of flower and it's you're trying to make sure it doesn't get powdery mildew, the first thing you do is, are there varieties that have resistance in their genetics? That's the first question you ask. And then you use resistant stuff. So that's preventative. You don't have to worry about it if you have genetics that are fairly resistant. And then there's cultural practices. There's cultural practices. So you could say, well, I'm going to make sure I water in the morning so it dries out during the day so I don't have the environment in which this pest can inhabit. And so that's kind of the same strategy we're talking about for Varroa. Now, I threw this slide in here because I think John's probably covered this, but bee biology is the same no matter where you go. Varroa biology is the same no matter where you go, but when you do what, like how you manage what type of the year, what season, I recommend that you don't listen to beekeepers in the South tell you when to treat for Varroa, because they're going to do it at a totally different month. They're going to have a totally different plan. What I would suggest is you look for beekeepers in your same climate zone. So for us, that'd be like 4B. Most of Iowa is 5A. So this paper that I handed out from Cornell is actually in the same climate zone as ours. And the stuff that's coming out of Ithaca and Cornell is northern aware, whereas some of the stuff you see about Varroa is California, Florida, Georgia, Texas beekeepers. And so just note that when you're watching YouTube videos, when you're looking at other beekeepers, ask yourself, what climate zone are they in? Why are they doing this in February? I would never do that in February because we all have different times of the year. So think about that as maybe a good rule of thumb, because like I said, biology is the same, but management practices change based on where you live and your seasons. So integrated pest management is often seen as a pyramid. If you turn into this this sheet, page 2. So the foundation is we want the best genetics we can get. And then on top of that, we need to have a good monitoring practice. We need to know how can we evaluate how many Varroa mites are in my colony. And then you ask, are there any kind of cultural practices I could do? Are there any ways to get mites out without using chemicals? And there actually are. And it's handy to know those. Then if you need to use some treatments, think about the natural chemicals, the stuff that's not going to have a lot of residuals in the comb, in the environment. And then if you have to, you can use synthetic chemicals. So it's kind of a start at the bottom with good foundations and work your way up. I hope that makes sense. So that's on page 2 there. So I'm going to use that pyramid, and here's how that works in Varroa. So the foundation is do the best you can to find good genetics. If you can, use queens that are selected for some kind of Varroa resistance with Varroa sensitive hygienic traits as much as possible. And VSH, Varroa sensitive hygiene, is not a breed of bees, it's a trait. You can get VSH Italians, you can get VSH Carnioleans, you can get VSH Russians. There's more Varroa sensitive hygiene traits generally in Russian bees than the others. The Saskatraz has VSH as one of their selective things. So I've had fairly good luck with Saskatraz queens. So think about, are my bees themselves tolerant, or can they handle it? So, and how I say this is a a mite breed, a bee that doesn't have any kind of resistance, you might have to treat it 5 times a year to keep mites low. But a colony that has some VSH traits might only require like 1 treatment a year. And so if I have to treat my colonies more than once, they're not candidates to be breeders, because I want to only reproduce queens and bees that can survive without a whole slew of intervention. So the second thing is conduct regular monitoring. Take mite counts and bee samples on a regular basis to track mite infestation levels and trends. I should go back. Page 3. Here, there's a chart talking about genetics. So I already said that Varroa sensitive hygienic is kind of, I think, the future, and I think that's the leading way of going. What they do is they excavate infected pupa that are capped. They can smell, and since there's something wrong with that pupa under there, there's something damaged. There's a foul brood odor they've actually identified that comes off of these bees. They chew the capping off and they kick those pupa out that are infested with Varroa. So they cut it off at the reproductive stage, so Varroa reproduces a lot less. There's grooming behaviors in bees. The bees clean themselves, and often they knock mites off when they're grooming. So the more grooming behavior that they groom themselves and then they groom each other, those are good behaviors to do. And then there's the Russian bees that have shown that they have a increased VSH behavior. And so the other thing under there's notes. You'll hear these 2 terms, phoretic mites and reproductive mites. Phoretic mites are the ones that are on the adult bees and present on the bees, and the reproductive ones are the ones that are reproducing in the capped pupa. So you'll have treatments that will only kill the phoretic mites. That means anything under the pupa being reproduced, that won't get killed by this treatment. And so what you'll need to do is you'll need to take the treatment, you'll need to put it in for 7 days, and then put a new one in for 7 days, and put a new one in for 7 days. So the whole brood cycle goes through, and every single mite is exposed to air at some point to cut the number of mites down. So that's genetic. Regular monitoring. The one thing that's not exactly in here is exactly how to do the monitoring. So I'll go through that. But then cultural controls. One thing you can do, and I know you're not going to like this because it requires buying something, is in the bee supplies, you'll see that they will sell frames for drone, and they're often plastic green frames. Anybody seen these before? So I would suggest you buy 1 drone frame per colony that you have. And what you do is you put that in position. If you have a 10 frame box, you put that in either position 2 or 8. It's like 1 away from there, and you let the queen, what they have is it has foundation that has the hexagonal cell size for drones. And the bees will draw out that comb that's that size. When the queen's going and laying, she's measuring the cell size. She sees this is a big cell, I'm going to lay a drone here. You'll have a full comb full of drone. And because drone has a much longer development cycle, mites are drawn to the drone because they can reproduce a lot faster in the drone. So what you do is you put one of these green frames, and I was going to bring one and I forgot them. Mine are all in my freezer right now. I've got 3 deeps full of drone comb in my freezer. And but what they do is they'll put drone in there, and before they cap that, the mites will be drawn to that drone comb. After that drone comb is capped, take it out of your box. You've just removed slew of mites. Put it in the freezer for 7 days. The pupa and the mites will all die. And you can put it back in your colony a week later, and they will excavate all that, but the mites will all be dead. And you've just knocked down the number of mites. I know, like Kim Floatum, he does the Bee Culture podcast, I think every couple weeks. This is all he does right now for his mite control. He uses drone capping, and he says he keeps his mites under the threshold and he doesn't have to use chemical treatments. So that's one way of naturally, you remove mites by trapping them in the drones, and you remove that drone comb. Another thing I used to do, here's a deep size,
I have one question.
yeah, go ahead.
This drone phone, how's the timing of that? They don't fill it that fast, do they?
Well,
You got a full frame and then you take it to the freezer, or do you do half, or how do you time that?
you get it with as many are capped as possible. I mean, like I said, the drones are capped longer, they have a longer, so you got a little bit more leeway, but I would say every time you check your colony, just glance at that drone comb. I mean, that's one of the things on your checklist when you do your colony checks. My checklist is peek at my drone comb. Is it capped? And if it's mostly capped, I would take it out. In fact, what I do is I have 2 combs per colony and I swap them. So I put the new one in and then I let them, and then I put the other one in the freezer. And so I always have I have a couple deeps and it just says drone on it and all the combs are in there, and I bring it out to the apiary. And so when I see, oh, this one's all capped, take it out, put a different one in there. And that's a way of you're always taking mites out of your colony. The other thing, I used to do this is a medium-sized frame in a deep box. So if you set a medium-sized frame in a deep box and I wrote an M on the top, they will actually build comb underneath this, and it'll be all drone. And what I did then is I pulled that out, and then I took my hive tool and I cut it off and I gave it to my chickens because I had 24 layers. And they love it. I mean, that's a protein boost. The eggs are awesome. Like, so you can feed your mites to your chickens. That's what I say. So yeah, if you take like a shallow or medium frame in a deep box, give them space, they will almost always draw that out. Now don't leave that in long because they will draw it out and then it'll be stuck to the next frame, and then you have to slide a whole hive tool underneath it and it's a mess. So that requires a little more. I've switched to the drone comb because a lot more room for error and timing, like you said. I use that same drone comb in my mating yards to actually reproduce lots of drones. So my queens have lots of drones to mate with. So take some of those ways of cultural controls. And those are on page, the fourth, or let's see, where are we at here? You see a Varroa mite cultural practices. So you have drone comb frame, removing drone brood, screen bottom boards. If you have a lot of their grooming behavior, they'll knock some mites off. They'll fall all the way out of their hive, out of the screen bottom board. About half of my colonies are screen bottom boards. It used to be all of them. Small colonies are always seem to have less mites than large ones. So the 4th one down there is kind of the Tom Seeley method. He likes a lot of small colonies, but that's not so helpful if you're trying to reproduce a lot of honey. And then colony spacing. One of the ways that Varroa spread is that bees drift. Bees will go out from one hive with a mite on them and they'll come back to a different hive. So if you throw all of your colonies with the same entrance facing this way, and let's say you have 6 colonies and all the entrances are facing this way, you're going to get a lot of drift. Whereas if you spread them out a little bit and then make the entrances face opposite ways, you get a lot less drift from colony to colony to colony. One of the things I think is that the propensity to rob out colonies is the propensity to spread mites. And one things I don't like about some bees is some bees just like, they'd rather rob than forage flowers any day. And they're always spreading mites. And so one of the things I try to make sure my bees are the ones that are not growing in their mite population, usually the ones that are not robbing. And then brood interruption too. If you interrupt the brood cycle, then you're interrupting the mite reproductive cycle. So in nature, what happens is a colony gets big and it swarms. The queen leaves and leaves a queen cell behind. And that colony that's left behind then will not have brood in it for a while because that queen needs to hatch and go get mated and come back and then start laying eggs. So that's nature's way of cutting the mites down, is interrupting brood cycles. So I do know some people that will do it intentionally. They'll just cage their queen and leave her in a cage for a week and a half and then release her again. And that'll interrupt the brood cycle and that'll cut down on mites. I'm not much of an interruption brood cycle person, but it is a way of cutting down on mites without using chemicals. And I know people that do it with a lot of success. I just want to raise bees that produce a lot of honey, so I don't want to do that. I want to rely on Varroa sensitive hygienic behavior. And then finally, there's these treatments, and you have kind of organic acids and oils, and you have synthetic chemicals, and that's the next page with kind of blue, green, and blue. And the only two things that are wrong on this page, this is a little bit dated. What Mite Away quick strips are no longer available. It's called Formic Pro, but it's formic acid. It's in a pad form. It's a slow release formic acid pad. So X out Mite Away quick strips and put Formic Pro. That's the product that would be there. And HopGuard is actually on number 3, not number 2. HopGuard 3 is what you could buy if you wanted using the hops beta acids. The HopGuard is, I consider it the gentlest treatment out there. I will put HopGuard 3 on 2 frames of brood and treat them because it's the least interruptive of the bees. So those are the treatment options, and you see there's temperature variations. The formic acid, the Mite Away quick strips, what's Formic Pro, that is the most sensitive when it's hot weather. So be careful with that. Put that on there, and if it's 100 degrees, all your bees will be outside the hive saying, "We can't stand it in here. There's too much acid in the air." You'll get rid of the mites, but you also get rid of the bees. So these are different treatment options, and like I said, I would recommend you kind of, think about which one you want to use. What temperature it is. There are websites that will say, what time of the year is best to use what treatments. The very back of page kind of has some of that. So some treatments you can do while the supers are on the colony, most of them you can't. But HopGuard and Mite Away are the 2 that you're allowed to have honey supers on the top. Those will not spread and taint the honey like the other ones will. So one thing that's kind of intimidating is thinking about putting a bunch of bees in a little alcohol wash kit. I recommend that you take a frame that's covered with bees, get yourself a Rubbermaid tub and a half cup. What I like about this is that the half cup is the right contour with this. Like it just fits. So what I do is I have a frame from the brood nest. Generally, if there's open brood, so there's larvae, there's white there, that's where the bees are hanging on to these mites, these nurse bees. I take a frame of bees and I just go like that, and all the bees fall off. And you let the adult bees kind of fly out, and you'll have a lot of nurse bees in the end. You can just tap it down to the corner, get yourself half a cup of bees, leveled off if you have to. What I do is I pour the alcohol in here at the beginning. This kit is essentially a basket. It sits in a plastic thing. You fill this with alcohol. You dump a half a cup of bees in here. Put the lid on. Hold it on the bottom. If you squeeze it like this, you'll never get that lid on. Hold on the bottom. And what happens is the alcohol is going to kill the bees and the mites. And if you squish it around, the mites will fall through these, and you'll be able to count the mites on the bottom. Now, people say, "Oh no, you're going to kill 300 bees if you do that." Well, about 300 to 500 bees are dying of natural causes every day in your hive. So you're sacrificing 300 bees to save your whole colony. It's a pretty good deal, to tell you the truth.
I need to check for your queen first.
Yeah, so yeah, you don't want the queen in there. So what I do is I always check the frame and I make sure the queen's not on there. I shake it off and I let the bees fly out and I check one more time in there and look for the queen there. It's best if you know that you already know where the queen is and she's on a frame that you haven't pulled out anyway. Another reason why I mark every single one of my queens, because it helps me be efficient in mite washes. I have 48 of these. So I go to my colonies and I do this in batches. I fill the alcohol, I put a piece of masking tape on the colony number on the top. So I am doing, when I'm going through a colony, bang, swish, close, put it in there. I can analyze it later. I can bring it home and analyze it later, then order the right amount of mite treatments I need for next week when I go back and put mite treatments in there. I find that efficient. I started with like 2, and you're like doing this, and you're like, bees are kind of getting angry that it's open still, you know. So I try to stay in my colonies as least amount of time as possible, get everything I need to be done, get the colonies put back together. So that's my recommendation. There are ways that you can do like powder sugar. You can coat them with powder sugar and shake it off, and then the mites, when they're grooming the sugar off, they knock the mites off. I am surprised they're even suggesting that anymore because I think that's a mess. What I have found, especially if there's a flow of any kind, you shake bees off, you've got like nectar in the powdered sugar. It's like clumps of sugar, and like you don't get near all the mites off the bees with the powdered sugar method. So it's considered like useful but pretty unreliable. The alcohol stuff is good, and also here's an alcohol wash I did back in September. So you can pass this around and look for mites on the bottom. So this was from colony number 40. And the one good thing about alcohol is it preserves the bees too. So people say, hey, use, you know, dishwater, or was it wiper fluid, you know, like, yeah, there's lots of stuff that will kill bees and mites. But windshield washer fluid, if you let this set for like 3 days and you open it, it is the rancidest smell you'll ever have. So I just stick with alcohol because then I can throw this in there and I can check it 3 days later and it's all fine. It's like preserving this. This is 6 months old. And what happens is the alcohol gets darker, but it's still preserving stuff. I could send these mites off to a bee lab and they could still analyze these bees from 6 months ago and test for diseases and stuff if I wanted to. Alcohol is just a preservative. So it's more expensive, but that's how I find it's useful because it can last a little longer. 70 or 90, 70% is usually what I buy. It's pretty cheap at Dollar General.
So that's the
Isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol.
You could use vodka or gin, but
I was thinking it might be cheaper to get cheap.
I don't know. At 2020, it probably was cheaper. Like that was one of the the biggest disruption in beekeeping is we couldn't get our alcohol anymore because it was all sold out. Or you're buying an art, you know, like it cost me a lot of money to do mite washes in 2020.
that's when I tried windshield washer fluid and it doesn't kill them. I don't like it.
It gets bubbly and it's just, yeah,
We did it once.
yeah.
My bees could swim. Windshield washer fluid.
So if you're doing that on a regular basis, now you're recording, you know, per colony, how much mite sample was that? And then the only thing this sheet doesn't have is like mite thresholds. So I would recommend, there's 2 schools of thought. Actually, there's kind of 3 schools of thought, but to keep it simple, some people use 2% infestation. So a half a cup of bees is approximately 300 bees. You take your number, divide by 300, that's your infestation. So 6 mites per 300 bees is 2% infestation. That means 2% of your nurse bees have mites on them. And again, that doesn't even count for what's being reproduced in the comb. We're just analyzing that. Other people suggest 3%, so that's 9 mites per 300 bees. What seems to be becoming a pretty common thing right now, recognizing that there are higher and lower mite loads in different times of the season. What I'm using is kind of what University of Nebraska Lincoln is recommending now is 2% infestation the first half of the year, April through July. Then August, September, October, 3% is like your allowable threshold. So that's what I'm doing, but you can pick your number and just stick with it and say, I'm going to sample. I'm going to try to do some other ways to keep mite levels down. But if they reach over this level, I'm going to use a treatment. So here's a couple of my colonies. It's, I think about the last week in June. So I got honey supers on. I'm using these to actually produce brood, and I'm going to use one of the extra deeps to split for nukes. So I'm letting these things really build up, and I'm going to use some of the frames for splits, and then also hopefully get some honey off these. Anybody want to guess? And these are comparable population. I had a lot of bees in these comparable population colonies. You think the mite level was the same, each of them? What I did is I sampled mites. I took these apart, so sampled mites. Colony number 1 had 3 mites. Colony number 2 had 27 mites. A lot of people say, you just sample a few colonies. Like if one's high, they're probably all high. If one's low, they're probably all low. That's just ridiculous. Don't believe that. So I had to oh no, colony 2 is that's too high for me to make nukes out of. So I took the supers off. I shook the bees out of the supers. I gave those supers to something else. I took the other deep out and I shook those bees off and put those on a hygienic colony and put treatments in. And I don't even think 2 is going to survive the winter. I even requeened it a month later when I did a treatment and they were still above threshold. I did another treatment, they're still above threshold. I requeened it. I'm like, okay, and we'll see if you live, right? So one colony can be high, one colony can be low. That's why you want to sample every colony and treat each colony as an individual colony. What commercial people do is they'll say, well, I have 500 hives here. I'm just going to throw mite treatments, all of them, because I don't have enough time to sample them. But Randy Oliver's shown that you can, if you have a method, you can sample a colony in a minute. And he actually has proven that you can actually save money by not buying mite treatments on the ones that don't require it. You can actually come out ahead, but the commercial guys are not. It's hard to change your ways, right? If you've done it for a while. And so I'm not going to bash anybody. It's an adaptation. I would say since you're starting out, just start out knowing all you can and sampling on a regular basis and just treating when you need to. One of the good things that happens when you become more and more experienced is you know what healthy bees look like. You look at these bees, they're healthy. They all have good wings. They all have regular bodies. They all have regular patterns. There's some genetic diversity you see is more orange in some, more grayish, light yellow in others. Queens will mate with 15 to 20 drones. So you'll always have a little bit of diversity among your worker population, but these are healthy bees. These are not healthy bees. They just look different, right? Does anybody point out any problems that you see? Kind of dull looking. The wings are all kind of, yeah. What do you notice?
The upper middle, there's.
Right here? And then up there?
Yep.
We got 2 deformed wing virus bees right here in this picture. There's actually 2 mites on bees as well. Varroa mite right there. Varroa mite way up there in that corner. So this was a nuke that someone sold me, and it was dead 3 weeks after I bought it. I actually had the state apiarist come and look at this because I brought it out of state, and I'm like, oh no. I guess I got this from someone in Minnesota. Sold me a few nukes, and this is what they all look like. They were all full of mites, full of viruses, and had state apiarists look at this because I wanted to make sure I didn't have anything beyond Varroa. And so of the nukes, yeah, this one was dead. I think of the nukes, I have like 2 left.
But the sad part is, some of those bees are gonna get out of there and go to the good hives.
Yep, yep. So what I did was when I bought these nukes, I actually created I called it my quarantine hospital yard. I literally had 1 yard just dedicated to these colonies, and I moved all the other ones to other yards so they wouldn't spread whatever they had. And then I called the state apiarist and say, look at these. I not the most experienced with diagnosing everything, but I want to know, because there was parasitic mite syndrome going on. They were chewing the brood up in the colony, which is a hygienic behavior, but they had, you can only be so hygienic, right? You can only clean yourself so much. And if you're this infested, even hygienic can't recover from that. So just zoom in. If you can't see that, I'll zoom in on this. You notice there that deformed wing virus on bee, and you'll see that mite on that bee. If you see mites on bees, and so this was actually so small that I think if I would have taken a 300 bee sample, I would have like taken half the population. So that's why I had to quarantine it and start treating it and all of that sort of thing. So you're a new beekeeper, don't be suckered into stuff. Know what healthy bees look like. Look at your nukes. Get a health certificate from the state. This didn't come with one. No wonder why. So I have Andy Joseph, the state apiarist, is going to look at my nukes and give me a health certificate that I'll have to give to any customers I have to say, yeah, these were looked at by a third party, and there's no disease. There's good health in there. So 5 do nots and 5 do's. Do not think ignorance is bliss. Neglect to monitor Varroa levels in your colonies. That's a lot of beekeepers like, oh, I'd just rather not know. Well, don't say, well, since I don't see mites on me bees, I'll assume there's not a problem. What did I say? If you see them, you're probably already too late. I see my colony getting large, gathering a lot of honey, and these are signs Varroa is not going to be a problem. I showed you a picture of a really healthy looking colony that had a lot of Varroa and was going to be, once their population started going down, they were going to be done if I hadn't intervened. Assumed an intervention or treatment worked without retesting mite levels. So you treat 1 month, you retest the next month. Did it go down? Did it work? And if not, do a different kind of treatment, or the same one twice in a row is fine too. And then there's a lot of treatment-free beekeeping out there. Don't start treatment-free. Treatment-free is something that you do after you learn beekeeping a while and you figure out maybe how you can help the bees. I've already explained some of the ways you can help the bees battle mites on their own. And once you know that you're under thresholds and you don't have to treat, then you can be a treatment-free beekeeper, right? So like keep your mite levels under that by looking for good genetics and trapping some drone and some of that. And you could maybe be a treatment-free beekeeping, but don't say, I'm going to just get a bunch of colonies, throw them in there. I'll be a treatment-free beekeeper and I'm somehow saving the bees. You're not. You're probably raising Varroa mites that are going to infest your neighbor's colonies. So know the levels and react accordingly. And so what you do is you make a plan to regularly take Varroa samples. I think monthly is best. I don't do it in July because supers are like through the roof in July. July is when they're gathering most nectar. I'm not gonna take 6 supers off a colony and test that. I can't do that like 4 days in a row if I were to try to do that. So I make sure they're down in June, and then once I take the honey off, I look again and I treat if I need to after the supers come off. Drone frame to trap and remove Varroa mites. I think that's the easiest thing that anybody can do. So I would just recommend that. Obtain queens from breeders who select for Varroa resistance. I would suggest you think about that. I mean, you're getting what you're getting now, but let's say you lose a queen. I need to buy a queen. Don't just buy any queen. Think about what might have the best Varroa resistance, and treat colonies when they're over the infestation threshold. Follow the treatment instructions. There's also people putting YouTubes on, oh, I just poured some of this into this shop towel and threw it in there. And no, follow the instructions of a treatment that's certified by the EPA. and then rotate treatments to prevent the slow the development of resistance. If you just use one treatment over and over and over and over again, you're actually encouraging the mites to become resistant to that one. So what I do is I use a different treatment every other year. I rotate them.
Would you share just a little bit about a mite bomb if they weren't yours?
So a mite bomb would be, I test a colony in May and they were like 3, and I tested it in June and they were like 5, and then I tested it in July and they were like 30, right? Suddenly, where did all of these mites come from? Sometimes that is neighboring bees, especially drones are pretty social. Drones are like, they'll go to different colonies all the time and they got a lot of mites on them. So you might have bees from a neighbor that just has Varroa infestation, and some of those bees got into your colony and they increased. I don't have a lot of mite bomb experiences, but
For new beekeeper.
but that can happen.
Know that a neighbor has bees close by.
Yep.
This is something.
And that's why you want to test kind of on a regular basis to see if there's a trend and see, whoa, what happened. I know people that they'll test they'll test once in May and, oh, I only have 2, and then they'll test in like September, right? And like, I have 40, like, no, you should try to catch it before then, if you can. So yeah, that's what they call a mite bomb, is when suddenly there's a whole slew of, yeah. Pass that around if you want. You can see the little mites on the bottom. Any other questions?
Were there any repercussions?
Nope. Nope. I didn't get any money back. I even thought about, I went through PayPal and they said, nope, since it's comparable, we can't do anything. Yeah, the problem is you
Ten other people say, "Hey, me too."
is you can get prosecuted for slander if you're not careful with that online. So, in fact, the guy that I bought nukes from was in the middle of a lawsuit because he slandered someone else.
Did you let him know about it?
I did. Huh?
Did you let him know about it?
Oh, yeah. I opened these things and said, I'm bringing them back. I want my money back. He's like, what do you mean? I'm not gonna do that. I won't do that. It was quite a sad situation. It's the last time I've bought nukes. I'm reproducing my own beer.
Make your own.
Yeah, I think so. If you look, yeah, see some of that point right there. I think some of that.
Basically, this area is stuck on the top.
Yeah. Unless this has been sitting in my basement long enough, there's a hint of mold on some. Yeah, you look on the underneath, and if there's little white stuff, that can be.
Good presentation.
Yes, thank you for doing that. Yeah.
In your opinion, when you said regular mite checks, what does regular mean?
Monthly or every other month.
Okay.
Like I said, when the honey supers are on in July, just a lot of work. So I try to make sure they're good going into the honey flow. Generally, we get the most nectar coming in June 15 to July 30. That's when, like, you're going to see your colonies explode, and be ready, because you're doing everything else. You don't even have time for mite checks at that point. You're like, this one needs another super, that one needs another super. I'm just running around the supers, and trying to keep them from swarming at that point. And after I pull my honey off, then I do a check. So I do a monthly other than July. I just haven't found a way to do that. And I also check my nucleus colonies, because I build nucleus colonies in June and beginning of July, and I'll check those, but I almost never need to treat them. Those small colonies keep their mite levels fabulous. So I didn't treat a single nuke last year. I went into the winter with 70 of them. So it's another method of splitting hives, and it seems like the smaller colony, the better they can handle it. But you have to have big colonies to have a lot of honey, so that's the
Did everybody get to see how that opens and closes? Yeah, okay. All right, so Dean and Phil have some stuff back there. I'm gonna try and use the camera back in the corner. If you guys can all get on that side of the stuff so that Dean is facing the camera, I'd appreciate it.
The other day, they were talking about summer bees and winter bees.
Okay.
They were advocating to feed serum up through October to build your hive up. So you'd have enough winter bees that
Something
would
like
last
that,
the
yeah.
winter, and they would be more.
Well, measure with you.
Well, no, it's.
So remind me,
It's
remind me to talk about that at some point, because there's a difference between the summer bees. The winter bees live a lot longer.
So you want to have like a good, going into the winter, you have a strong colony.
Oh, okay.
What I'm gonna do is build a frame so that this sits in there like this. And it'll have a spacer in it, because those are wired. They're just a little bit. That's all.
That's the medium, you grab the medium.
Yeah,
This is the deep surge.
yeah, same premise.
The line struck.
Yeah, same premise though. It'll sit like this, because it's, I think there's, I'd have to look again, but then they have a little, like a 2x4. Fill in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many, how wide?
You can do 20. Yeah, I think you can, it's kind of.
Sorry.
What?
It's a wreck. It looks just like this, but it's all horizontal. A lot of work to set this up, don't they? No, there's no gaps.
I don't, I think it's a feeder.
This is the top. So you can get some, get out, and you can't come back in the same way.
Yeah, these tend to have a harder time expanding this way.
Yeah, I'm just. Okay.
I see a little over here, but I don't
But yeah,
see
it'll
it.
be in deep frames.
Okay, you're good to go. I think.
Phil's gonna go first, cause we're talking about mites and stuff, and he's got his mite things there.
Well, so don't confuse, I'm Phil B, that's Phil W. The two Phils, and I'm gonna build quite a bit. Phil, that was a great presentation, and so what I've got is some hands-on here. Come and grab it as we get going. But there are a number of ways to get that half cup of bees, and on the ones that I've tried, that what Phil described with the tub, to me is by far the best, definitely by far the best. So as he was talking about shaking those bees in there, it's a two process for us. My wife and I do this together. So meaning I get the bees out, I'm checking, no queens, and then I just give them a good shake. I know he thumps his, and I read somewhere that I really liked, it's called vigorous, not violent, because they still, you still want them to have their legs, all right? The reason we do and go to shake into there is because of that queen may be there. A good example we had is I went through a colony, she was marked. I knew my queen was marked, didn't see her. Often, good. Went, grabbed a second frame, and Donna says, "We got a queen over here." I said, "No, I checked. She's not there." Sure enough, where my marked queen went, I have no idea. I didn't keep looking for her. We had a beautiful queen. Could have been her own daughter. Who knows? We could have had a two queen in there. But if she hadn't seen that with this tub, I may have just killed my only queen. So we keep queen clips. To use these as well, and you just grab and locate. Sometimes we're in a hurry and I'll just do this, and then she goes in my pocket because I'm off to get something else. The nice part there, and I like what Phil said, is those bees, those hoarders, they will fly off. And I kept thinking, well, all my bees are gonna fly out of there when I thump them in there. It's like, well, no, registries don't
Not the
fly.
nurse bees.
Yeah, and I like your cup. We just got this thing. You could tell it's been used. It's covered. And it's just a quick dump them right there, scoop them up and dump them in. Ours is a two-person operation. So Donna's standing there, right there. The alcohol's in there. I dump 'em in. She caps them. Just a quick euthanation to the side. We learned from Phil. more than one of these. Because as he talked about, do your bees get agitated? Is you're one person and you're storing this for 1 minute so that you can use this again later? Yeah, they do. How many do you have now? 40?
48.
48? We're building up. We're hoping to get 12. I think they're like about $25 a piece. aren't they?
They're on sale for 21 in Man Lake right now.
No, they're grab them. Something else to spend some money on. But what a great thing to have enough of these so that you're just getting your colonies, you're moving right along. And then later, you're sitting in the air conditioned dining room with these on the table, drinking beverage of choice,
Yeah.
right? And doing
Recording
your count, recording. Life is way better. You don't have to veil. Nobody's angry around you. It's not hot. Okay, so that's definitely worth it. Then we got some bees right here. We got an actual sample. Thank you, Ringless. If you want to look, I know you probably got the fast yours around. This is water rather than alcohol, but there are some mites in there. I'm gonna pass that to you. You can do a comparison if you want. But once you figure out, okay,
Other
you're-
stuff in there too.
yeah, there's some debris in there, material other than bees. What do they call that? MOBA. Anyway, we like to recycle our alcohol. And if you just dump it back in, you're gonna get the varroas, the mites, or excuse me, the debris as well. Dollar General, I bought this beautiful little sieve. I think, Dean, you've tried coffee filters, paper towels. It works. It's a slow process. So then I could do it, and then we could do a second quick count to make sure that it matched the two. Dump it out, clean it out, and move on. All right, now, you reach your threshold. What are you gonna do? Oh, by the way, this is the thing that I used one time. This is the powdered sugar. Feel free to look at it. I'm not even gonna open it. It was a pain. Anyway, now you got a treat. So what do? You've got all kinds of things. I think you went through a great thing, and I brought just a few in as well. I know that I treat with oxalic acid vapor. I haven't tried the dribble yet. Have you?
Once.
Dribble? You?
That's what I'm
That's what you
doing
do
last
now?
resort in before winter.
Okay.
If I-
So
Yeah,
that
I-
means you can mix the acid with sugar base, a one-to-one sugar base, dribble it in there. I haven't mastered that technique yet, so I'm not even gonna give you any directions on how to do that. But one of the things about the beautiful vaporizer that I know you got one of these, you used to have to put a wand in the front up into a heat and seal everything up. Well, the bees get angry about that, and you've got to move that entrance, or at least we did on ours, and bees are coming out there upset. I'm gonna show them how to use this. If you notice, there's a little bitty hole or a little bitty pipe at the end of it. That's where your vapor is gonna come out. And you can drill a hole in the back of your colony down on the. Yep, you can do it in a deep if
Down
you
on
want
the
to. I have all of mine in the
board.
bottom boards. Put that in. There's no bees there. They don't get upset. I plug mine with a golf tee for the rest of the time. Boom, you got it. It takes seconds. And nobody's upset. Nobody's coming out the front looking for you.
You just need to make sure you wear goggles and a respirator.
Here's
when
the
you
next
have
part.
that. Yeah,
It,
that's why I don't do it. I don't wanna have.
it's not safe for us. So respirator up, eyeball up, glove up, just be smart for yourself. Yeah, I'm sure you will see some YouTubes of guys that are going out there and just putting this wand in with no protective gear on. I'm not one of those guys.
Stand upwind of it.
We got a lot of money involved with that and the generator to run that.
Yeah,
Actually, you know what? I use a car battery and an adapter that goes from that to the end. It makes it a lot easier. That way I can put that car battery in the back of my pickup or my Ranger that I'm using. Looks into
Battery operated.
Yep, yep, way easier, way easier. You guys add anything else to this?
I do that, but not that way.
All right.
I did hand out like what I use for my own personal plan, so you can read through that. The
So
back
like push.
side was what I do to treat my nukes, and then what I do is I have a year A and a year B on my production colonies. So year A is like 2020, 2022. Even number of years I use Apple Life Bar, and then on odd years I use Formic Pro, and then I do the oxalic acid dribble. If I still have mites above threshold when I do the September treatment, because oxalic acid will not do anything for the mites that are reproductive in the cavities. So essentially in September, mine are all broodless. There's no new resources coming in, so they stop rearing brood. And that's when oxalic could knock off the mites before winter. But I rarely have to do that, but that's my last ditch effort. If I'm like, I hope this survives the winter, I would use oxalic dribble. And I had to treat 40% of my colonies last year. 60% kept under the thresholds with the other mechanisms. So trying to keep increasing that. That's my passion is to actually be treatment free because they're keeping it under thresholds.
Back that sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The long-term goal is usually genetic. Like you want a long-term crop that's gonna keep pests off. It's adapted and it's genetic. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
Well, I'm gonna move into a little bit of collecting the honey that the bees are gonna make for you, so you can do something with that. And we haven't talked a whole lot about getting into the hives too much, but I wanted to share just a few things. First thing you're gonna have is your top cover, your telescoping cover, that you can use this while you're going through your hives, because you can set that to the side, usually behind you, because you wanna work from the back of your hive, because the bees are going in and out the front. And then, of course, you have to have your hive tool to open up the inner cover, because it's gonna be stuck down with the propolis, which I borrowed a bunch of collected propolis along. It gets really sticky when it's hot and in the hive. So this can be taken off and set to the side.
Can I say one thing?
Yes,
Pete?
yes, you may.
Hey, how would you do it?
Brand new beekeepers will do this. That just pisses them off. Okay? Put your hand here, put it underneath and open it slowly.
You make a crack with
And
this.
they'll be like, oh, we don't care. But if you like snap it up and down, you probably squished like a dozen of them. They'll smell that everyone died. They'll just be stapling your, yeah, they'll be mad. This will be. So just think of when you're cracking these boxes, try not to make any kind of really fast jerking moves.
Because they're gonna be stuck together.
Yeah,
That
you
stuff
have
gets
to-
really
You have to
sticky.
pry it apart.
So once you get the box pried apart, and what do you do with this box that has either honey or bees in it? You set it on the ground, you tip it up. The best way is to use your telescoping cover and put it like that. You don't want to set it down in, because you're gonna have bees around there. And you'll squish them. This way you only have, 2, 4, 6, 8 little spots that the bees might come in contact with, 2 surfaces to smash them. And then, of course, you got your queen excluder or honey excluder or whatever you want to call it. And then when you're going through your hive, the way I do it, I think I explained when we went through that dead out, I go through the second frame first and get it out of the way. You can either set it aside and kind of work your way on through. So then the other thing, this is a honey super that's full of honey, and if it was Phil's, he'd have 6 of these up here. It could be. So this box is gonna be full of bees without the queen if you use the excluder. So how are you gonna get bees out of this box to get the honey? You don't want the bees with the honey when you go to extract it. Any ideas how to get the bees out of the
Smoke them,
frames? You could smoke them, but that just kind of calms it down. It doesn't drive them too far.
shake them, not violently.
Take them out, brush them off.
Vigorously.
Vigorously, not
You can
violently.
do that.
Russia. You could.
Well, there's different ways. The way I started out, you got a frame that's full of honey, you got bees on this. I would take my bee brush and brush the bees off in front of the hive, and then I'd take this and put it in another box. And then I would use this little handy blower, and I would blow all the bees off, which worked really good. But I heard some guy say, I got 40 boxes and I don't want to go through all that. But if you only got 2, you can probably do it pretty well.
sell some honey, and then you can buy some more.
And batteries and stuff too. So then, of course, when I was building stuff, there's a bee escape that Date Ant has, so you can use one of these. It's a triangular screen that you put underneath your honey super. The bees will go down through this, crawl out through the little maze, and then they won't be able to get back up into the honey super as easily.
It's like a maze. They can get out, but they don't know how to get back in. They just kind of keep following the angles and they're not.
So that's good
But-
for a day or two.
Bees are really smart.
They'll
And I
find
give
their
it a day
way
or
back.
two. They will figure it out.
And then I see a bigger guy use this kind of queen excluder.
Oh, yeah.
Escape, bee escape.
Bee escape, I'm sorry.
Yep.
So then that goes on, but then I also found out how well this works. You want to have an empty box down below. You know, an empty super.
You can't go to the bee store alone, can you?
So you put that on there, the bees are gonna go down when there isn't any nectar coming in from.
Another
the
thing that you need to
foragers.
make sure is you seal this. So you actually don't use your inner cover because the bees can get back in here. Like if you have a notch in your inner cover, I guess you don't. But I just put my like this, so like they can't get back into this top. They have to go down and then nothing lets them get back up.
That's one more way to get bees off of your frames. And then this is the thing I'd heard about so many times. This is called a fume board. There's some sticky or stinky stuff.
Stinky stuff.
A bee be gone, honey robber. You get a couple squirts of that on this felt fabric. Put that on top of the hive like that. And if it's nice and warm and sunny, it heats
Needs
this
to
up.
be sunny.
Gotta be.
It will drive the bees right out of those frames.
It stinks and they all go down.
How long does that take for them to leave?
10 minutes,
That's like
Or
a
less.
15-minute, 10 minutes, 15
What
minutes.
about these
Yeah,
other ones? You
or
have to put
less.
it on
like a day
Per day.
before,
I keep escape screwed on 3 or 4 days, actually.
but you have to take all your honey supers off.
Yep.
Put that on, put the honey supers back on, get the bees out and take the honey supers off again. So that's a lot of work. Where I found this last year worked quite well to drive the bees out. And I was only doing like 2 boxes a day.
But
I'd take 'em-
don't leave this on for an hour.
No.
All your bees are gonna be on here.
Yeah.
Stinks in there.
And that's what we use, and so we have 2 of them, so we'll get one set and set it here. By the time we're doing the next one and set it there, we're back to pulling this one.
Okay.
And so it's a great way, you can just go back and forth with 2 fibers pretty quick.
It's a quicker thing than.
It
the
is
bee
quick.
escape, yeah.
And it depends on how much you're doing. If you got 2 hives and you got 1 box, it's not such a big deal. If you get 10 hives and you got 30, 40 boxes and you want to get them all done in
More
a day or
efficiency.
2, you know, there's different processes for the amount that you have to work with.
And if you've got unhappy bees, don't spray that BB gun on your veil. Not that either of us did that, but a friend of ours did.
We have a buddy that did that. Well, if they don't like the smell, maybe I'll put that on myself and they'll leave me alone.
It's a bad thing.
Bad idea.
So once you get your honey supers out, that look like this, and pass that around. That's what it's gonna feel like. Don't kind of squeeze it. but-
Liquid gold.
Yeah, don't squeeze it.
Squeeze it. Nice.
Now imagine 9 or 10 of those in that box you're picking up.
So what I do is take that out and I got a tub that I can put 5 or 6 of them in. I have this stuff in my basement. So it's a lot different than somebody who's got a place you can drive your pickup into right next to and get things done.
Something else to buy.
A garage, a building. So in order to get the honey out of that frame, you'll take something like this, a knife or something, and cut that top layer of wax
Nice.
off the frame on both sides. This knife is made with a little curve on it, so it sits right on that top edge of the top bar. And it'll cut the wax off. The important thing about putting a spacer in there, so you only have 9 frames, the bees build that wax out a little bit farther than if you had 10 in there. So it makes you a little bit more honey. There's different tools to get the caps open. Here's a roller that will just pop the holes in the wax capping. I don't see that working quite as well as some people do. And then here's a little scratcher. You want to make sure all the cells are open. If there's still wax cappings over the honey cells, that honey's not going to come out. And so they go in this extractor like this. This one holds 6 frames. And then that turns on over here. It'll spin like that. The honey flows out of the frames, goes down the side of the tank here. And here's some strainers that catch the wax or bee legs or wings or anything like that. That sits inside this bucket. And the honey will run into that through that bead in the bottom. And then you want to have a bucket like this that'll have some kind of opening that you can get the honey out later on to put in your jars or something. But as far as processing the honey, it comes out of that foam, that little bit of filtration, and that's all that there is. When we show this at fairs and stuff, people think, don't you have to cook it or bake it or heat it or process it or pasteurize it? It's like, no, you get it out of those wax cells, strain it a little bit, and it goes in your jars.
Does your extractor ever go for a walk on you?
It did in the beginning. Because
You can buy it. Don't walk no more.
because somebody, well, I've had people come and help use this and stuff. And if you don't scrape that wax capping off of one of the sides of the frames, it's gonna hold all that weight. And pretty soon it's gonna be going like this and be going faster and faster.
And off it goes.
So I got it drilled into the basement floor, but we tried it on a wooden pallet and screwed it down, and you got 2 people riding it like this. Another adventure for new
Riding
beekeepers.
extractors. I've done that.
And then this is a refractometer. You want to have your honey be 17.5% moisture or less. So this will measure the moisture content of your honey.
What if it's not?
Pardon me?
What do you do if it's not?
Depends which way it's going.
Call the bees back.
Feed it your chickens.
Well, they think it might-
Don't do that.
So if you have, let's say you have high moisture, it just means it's likely to ferment over time, so eat that first.
Yeah.
Right, because it's gonna have a lot shorter shelf life. But if it's below 18.6, which it should be if it's capped, the bees know. If it's under this moisture, that's when they put the capping on it. So the bees know what they're doing.
And I've read, and help me out if you've heard something different on this, I've read that if it is sweet clover, it's not uncommon for it to be capped at 19% and not ferment. I haven't experienced that personally, but I've read that. I don't know if you guys have.
So I test every bucket, and like if I have a bucket that's way low and a bucket's kind of high, then I just mix them and try to get the right.
A lot of times you'll have a frame that's 2/3 capped or 3/4 capped, but there's still open cells. Well, it's the end of the year and you want to get your stuff off, you know, that'll blend a little bit too. You can also take it and kind of shake it. You know, if the honey stays in the frames that aren't capped, you're pretty safe. But if you go like that, and all of it runs out, you know, it's pretty wet yet. So a lot of times I'll combine my frames. If I got 3 or 4 in this hive and 3 or 4 in the other one, I'll get them in one super and leave it on one hive instead of, you know, 6 of them are all partials. You know, I'll try to combine them so I have all the frames that aren't quite filled out on one hive or 2.
By the way, the honey weighs more than water.
Yeah.
Honey weighs almost 12 pounds per gallon. That means the bucket it weighs 60 pounds and it's full.
Mistake I made once is that I was letting something strain and I left the bucket open in a warm, humid day for a few days. So it absorbed a whole bunch of moisture from the air and then it was way above. And then those fermented, my jars about exploded. So
Yeah, honey's hydroscopic. It'll pull that water right in.
yeah, it'll pull water from the atmosphere. So seal the bucket up. You don't have that problem when you're extracting in your nice cool basement. When you're in someone's honey house, it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity. Bad news.
Yep. We run a dehumidifier at the same time.
So once again, to reiterate, when we said it costs about, what, $500-600 to get the boxes and your bees going together, you know, pretty soon you got
Normally they're not like that.
more things, you know, that you're putting your money into.
$1,200 for the kit, 2 hives, bees, I think.
Normal boxes.
What I added up.
Yeah, it's all
I'd
right.
add a couple thousand more.
Yeah, that's.
If
you're friends with Dean, that's about $3,000.
I have a tool that you put here and you go like this and it spaces them out. I don't have any of these notch
There's a little
things,
bit more.
but there's a tool that will space 9 frames out evenly in a 10. So I have a pair of those and I just go like this.
I'll try to remember. to
I
bring
set
those
them on
next
and I
week.
go like that and then they're all ready to go. Don't draw them out this way. I would put 10 in a box if you're start with foundation. Because they'll start making bridge comb and it'll be a mess. Like you still have to respect bee space if you've learned about that concept.
If you spread them out.
Spread them out as
I'd rather-
foundation.
I'd rather draw where there is no foundation and then they go to the foundation. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you spread out.
So I start with 10 frames. So the first season, then I cut them, extract them next, if I already have comb, then I do 9 with comb. But I don't do 9 with just foundation because it'll start messing up bad.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't do that right off the bat.
And if, the other thing is keep your frames together, like when you have 10 in
This
there.
goes back together in center.
Want them together. You don't want them spaced out like this. Keep them together and let them draw it out a little bit wider in the end. But that'll keep them from making comb that looks terrible and mangled. And it also means they're gonna be less propolis between each of these, and it's be easier for you to just pull them out. Because if I space them out, they'll fill that with propolis and you'll have to like be carving it out. So try to, when you're done. Here, where's the hive tool? I go like this. Keep them together.
It won't move that easy when they're
Right,
6 months old.
right. But they will move better if you keep these together than if they're spread apart.
Oh, for sure.
Because then they'll stick them, they'll have a lot more space to put glue between the colonies.
So did everybody hear why there's blue tape on those frames, what that represents? Somebody explain it.
Brood pattern. Potentially.
The size of the cluster.
You know, the size of the cluster and also those 2 frames in the center would have brood all the way out, you know, where the blue tape represents. And as you get further out towards the edge of the hive, you get less and less brood.
Generally, there's honey here and here.
Yep.
But I've had, yeah, they'll put honey on their side, but I've had full brood in the middle, all 8.
Yeah, and I
Yep.
just did that to represent
Yep.
halfway there, you know.
But I would
half-
say in the spring, you should see about like that. They'll start building like that in the spring when they're starting to rebuild their population. You'll see the bees just hanging out, just in that kind of.
Other questions or anything?
Well, with you guys here, what, this queen excluder, are you for or against it? I'm not getting a consensus.
I feel like it's a secret.
It depends.
You're used to that answer now, aren't you? Well, it depends.
Yeah.
If
I
you
don't
don't
use
have
them.
it on there, you're gonna have the queen laying brood up in your honey super.
Nope.
No, you aren't gonna have the queen laying eggs up in the honey super.
The potential is there.
Yeah.
So,
It's
Yep,
possible.
it's possible.
And then again, if you put it on, the bees aren't gonna wanna go up through there to build wax in your new
Yep.
foundation.
Right. It does slow down some of the travel. But what, if you have your main entrance in the bottom, generally bees want to build brood fairly close to their entrance. So I just have
2 deeps, and then I put as many mediums as they want. And generally my brood won't be above that top medium. So I'll have a medium and 2 deeps, and that'll be the brood, and everything else will be honey. And I never have a problem. So,
I do use it because I've had situations where the queens did come up into the supers and lay. And what a difficult thing to work with later.
So I run all 8-frame mediums, top to bottom, and I don't run any queen excluders. If I stack them up 8 high and there's brood in the center of that top box, I just move it down. If you're using 2 deeps on the bottom and medium honey supers and you find brood in your mediums, yes, you can move it down into your deeps, but then you have the gap on the bottom of that frame. It's not as easy for you to deal with.
For the drones, to get rid of the mites.
That does work.
yeah, so I would put the drone either here, here, or here, here.
I mean, if you had to move one of those down.
So
Yeah,
generally,
let them draw it on
yeah.
the bottom and fill it with drone, and you have chickens, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
But generally, if you have like a medium of honey here, she's not gonna cross that honey barrier.
Right,
She's
once
gonna
there's a
stay.
box of honey there, then,
Yep.
then she won't cross it.
And I actually stopped doing as many upper entrances. I used to drill holes and have entrances, and I found that encourages a little more of that. So I actually, this is their entrance. And then the top is just ventilation, and they use it every now and then, but as long as your entrance is at the bottom, the queen seems to stay in the bottom 2 deeps, and I never have a problem. So I use queen excluder for other things, so.
What?
Trapping queen specific places when I do queen rearing and things like that. So,
I make comb honey, so I don't want the queen laying anything up in the honeycomb.
well, that makes total sense.
So that's another reason to use it. And if you do have brood up in your honey super and you want to get rid of it towards the end of the season, you shake all the bees out of it and put the queen excluder, or make sure your queen's down below. Put the queen excluder on it so she can't go up anymore, but any brood that's in there can hatch out and go down into the bottom box. And then they'll finish filling those cells with this.
I think I heard before, you put the computer on to let them draw out a little bit in the supers first, and then that kind of draws them up once you put it on.
But if you
If you
do
have a
put it
new
on, make
super-
sure the queen's down below.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna exclude her with one place or the other, right?
Yep.
I thought you had said. they could exclude it all.
Everybody see the propolis and scrapings? Now you know what it looks like.
What do you do with it?
You can do a lot of different things with it. You can,
Chewing gum.
yeah, you can eat
Solar
it.
wax melter.
You can, put it in alcohol, swirl it around every so often for 2 weeks to
Oh, propolis.
2 years.
Tincture.
Yeah, and then filter it, propolis out. And what ends up in the alcohol is good for, you can eat it internally. A lot of other countries, they'll use propolis before they start taking an antibiotic. So they'll go to the drugstore, they'll get it propolis in some form or another, and take that for colds or they feel they're coming down with something.
My kids call it the dreaded dad's homemade cough syrup. Propolis tincture and honey.
Does it work?
I'm
Yeah,
sure
it
it's gonna
does.
be happy
It
hour.
does.
Yeah.
But it doesn't taste so good because I don't cook all the alcohol off. So.
Oh,
Going to
Well, you
sleep.
could- you
Yeah.
could
Tastes
add-
good, but it
you
feels
could add
good.
cinnamon or something.
Yeah. Making sure and the alcohol are gonna take care of the bacteria in your throat. I promise.
Well, but instead of like with the alcohol,
Clear, whatever.
Clear,
Way
I was
up.
gonna say.
like 50% propolis, 50% alcohol, or cover the propolis with alcohol.
And that's when you would use like vodka, right? Not,
Everclear.
Usually.
Everclear.
Way high.
It really extracts more.
Uh-huh.
But what I do with it, a lot of times, I put it in the freezer, kind of like that, put it in the deep freeze, in a Ziploc bag, take it out, break it up with a hammer, like on the concrete floor, and wash it, so you'll end up putting it in something with water, and like the wood debris and some of the wax parts and things like that will float to the top, so you can skim them off and dry it, put it back in the deep freeze. I run it through a coffee grinder once it's clean, so it gets real fine powder. And then I mix it with about 5 or 6% propolis by weight with sunflower oil and a little bit of castor oil. That I find works good. Skin, cold sores, athlete's foot, eczema, and
Become a farmer,
again,
so
it's sunflower oil, castor oil. so you
Anything I
need
can
it.
do to get out of my job.
Yeah. So yeah, it's, there's a lot of different things you can do for it, you find a lot of things. As far as things that it's good
We
for.
have one. We did once.
Well,
And what do you do with it? You know, here you got 20 bottles of it, and my wife takes it to farmer's market. What's that? What's that? What's that? What do you do with that? So, yeah, answer all those questions. as well. Here's a
Make it-
jar of
make it
honey. Do you
big,
want
make
some?
it-
You have this question, Joe.
You need to figure out how to partner with a naturopath or something like that
Yeah.
somewhere, you know, someone who believes in this kind of stuff.
Here's a jar of
Like
honey.
at a
Oh, I know what that
chiropractor's
is, and takes it and
office
goes.
out there.
There's a gal from Spearfish, South Dakota that I bought stuff from for years, and she makes balm, and it has propolis in it and beeswax and a bunch of other stuff, and it's like a healing balm, or she sells a tattoo balm. I always buy it when I go to the Sturgis rally up there. It works really good. No, but it heals tattoos up, and I mean, it does, really. Oh, yeah, and, you know, if you cut yourself or something like that, yeah, days, it's crazy, yeah.
What I do with my honey supers after I get the honey out of it, I'll take them just like that outside and set them out in my yard. I got a trailer and I use it. Set them out on that, and then the bees that are around come and suck out all the little bits of honey that's left in the cells. And then they've been out there a couple of days, they're gone, they aren't in the frames anymore. I'll take those and freeze them and make sure everything's out of it. So,
How long do you freeze things for? You said you freeze the.
I generally check my bees on Saturdays and Sundays. So it's a month between coming and going. So I just throw them in the freezer, take them in. But I'm sure it'll kill it in like 3 to 4 days.
Supers are exposed to some light and some air flow. If you were to stack them all up and seal them up, they wouldn't have. I actually store mine outside. Put my supers facing each other. Put 2 in the, I strap it and I put a cover and a rock on top of it. Because that's better than getting black palms. I tried that out on my cement pad a little bit. About 3 days later, I had big mountains now.
it works and it doesn't work, so what do you do? Where's the recipe? You know, everybody's gotta, try to think of.
So what's the answer?
It depends. Yeah.
All right, well, I've got something real quick we can look at and talk about getting ready for next week.
Well, because I want some.
George would be the best.
No,
Keep them, that's awesome.
You don't want your mites back?
No.
I could bring you some.
I want to make some swarm traps. And I want to put it on the inside. Swarm traps. I'm just kidding, just because I'm eager to be on it. Sure.
Stealing it, they come on their own.
Yeah, it's not stealing.
They're migrating on their own.
So Dean, is it next week you're not going to be able to make it?
Correct.
All right, so everybody tell Dean thank you for everything he's done for the class.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Give me a call if you need something sometime too.
Yeah. We haven't gotten anything figured out yet, but we're trying to schedule some hive visits. So probably once at Dean's, I'll have to get you on email again, Phil. I think that your March 6th might work out. The orchard in South Sioux lost all their bees, so I'm not sure when they're going to have bees for us to go out there. And I've only got a couple of hives and they're not really where I can host people. So I'm in that situation too. So Dean, we might be going to your house more than once for looking at hives, or to your locations. Maybe if you got multiple locations.
If you want to drive 2.5 hours, I can show you a whole lot of hives, but it's a waste.
Yeah, well, and you know, we can also invite the other half of the club up that direction, up to yours or to any of them. So,
I'll be doing an open hive thing sometime probably in June.
okay. Is everybody in here signed up for the Siouxland Beekeepers email? Definitely sign up for the Siouxland Beekeepers email group so that when we do something in Sioux Center or Orange City or South Sioux, wherever it is, you'll get an email and you'll get a notice in your email. So that's a good way to make sure you don't miss something. So for next week, I don't think I'm going to have the Google Slides put together. So there's a Google document that's linked. It's called Session 4, and it's from wherever we left off after feeding. Locating your beehives and inspecting your bees. So we'll try and get through that. We'll go through some of it in class. This is something that's new that is linked on my beginning beekeeping page, and this would be good for you to look at on your own computer when you get a better image than what it is on the wall up here. But these are just some slides that I found different places on the internet of healthy brood and unhealthy brood. And so you can start looking at things to try and get a feel for it. I was at a meeting one time and a doctor sitting alongside of me who was a beekeeper said it takes like 1,000 times of seeing normal before you can recognize abnormal. And that's really true in brood too. And brood is really where you want to pay attention because that's the first place that problems are going to show up is in the brood. So again, it's out there on the beginning beekeeping page so you can look at it on your own computers. This one I think is fairly obvious that that's abnormal brood. These are chalk brood mummies. And usually you see them on the entrance of the hive where the bees are trying to drag them out. Or you'll see them sometimes in cells. Somebody has just pulled these out of the cells. So anybody want to venture a guess? Normal, abnormal? Yeah, it's better on your own screen at home. So this is normal. These are just eggs and young larvae. Maybe they could have used a little more royal jelly. They're not real wet, but there's normal larvae down in there. Anyone want to guess? Abnormal. That is European foul brood. In particular, look at how that one there, it's not shaped right. They don't normally stand up like that, and it's got a little yellow-brown tint to it. There's some yellow-brown tint there. There's probably some other signs that I'm missing. These, I think, it looks like it might be the bottom of the cell. I don't think it is. I think that's larva. It's just that dark, and there's another one there.
Larva is not white.
Yep. This one, it's normal brood, but I put it in because it points out a good thing to pay attention to. You've got capped brood down here. You've got honey up here. This is where you're going to find a lot of the larvae and a lot of the larvae that you want to be looking at to see if this is a healthy hive or to see how the hive is doing. Any guesses? Abnormal. Good. That is chalk brood before it gets to the chalky stage. That's it's still looking fairly wet. Some of them anyway are looking fairly wet. That one pretty dried up. Any guess? Normal. That's a really nice frame of brood there, all the way out to the edges.
Regardless of the color of the cap.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's sometimes you'll see brood that's capped a little bit lighter, and a lot of it depends on the age of the frames, but that's a fairly normal color. You will notice that there are open spots in here. There's not enough open spots on this frame that you'd be concerned about it. This isn't a spotty brood pattern. It doesn't have to be, 100% or 99%. It's fine that there are some open cells in this. Yeah.
That could be evidence of some hygienic behavior. They've actually removed brood from those cells
Yep.
because there was a problem.
Yep, they could have detected there was something wrong there and they removed the brood out of those. That might be why they're open. Yep. Okay, normal or abnormal? Abnormal with a question mark. It's a queen cell, which you don't usually want to see, but there isn't anything wrong with the capped brood. There isn't anything wrong with the queen cell. Abnormal or normal? So normal, but if you're paying attention, that's drone brood. So again, it's kind of a trick. There isn't anything wrong with the brood, but you typically wouldn't want that much drone brood or wouldn't see that much drone brood. This frame must have been damaged and the bees reworked it and they drew out drone brood because they could in that situation. Nope, there's no queen cells. Some of these are pretty big, but they're not pointing down. They're not queen cells or even the beginning of queen cups. Normal or abnormal? So that one's normal. There's eggs, there's larvae, there's capped brood, and this one might throw you a little bit because it's yellow, but it's all yellow. It's just the tint of the picture. I've got a couple of yellow frames that will do that in the right sunlight. You have to adjust sometimes for the color of the frame or the color of the light. Any guesses? Yep. So it's a spotty brood pattern. If you looked closer at this, most likely some of those white things that are exposed are diseased. But even from here, you can tell, yeah, that's a spotty brood pattern. That's not normal. Normal or abnormal? Both? I like that. So it's normal, but it's a whole bunch of drone on the one side. In this side, it's pretty normal looking. Just overall, that frame is just ratted and broken and nasty looking. But there isn't a sign of a brood disease in here. It's not a normal frame. What do you think? Abnormal. So there's European foul brood again. This is more progressed. So see the sunken cappings? So it's not just the brood in this one. It's far enough that you can see that the cappings don't look right. They're sunken. There's a hole in that one. There's a hole in that one. There's a really old one that's got a hole in it. Yeah, that's getting pretty nasty looking.
Would you just take that frame out and dispose of it?
Taking the frame out and disposing of it won't deal with the issue. Nope. European foul brood is something that it's fairly common. And like when weather conditions are bad and the bees can't get out and get good forage, then you might start seeing it in some of the brood. The brood's not as healthy. And then when the weather clears up and they're bringing in good, healthy food, it goes away. If it gets to this stage, that's quite a bit further along. You can get antibiotics to treat for European foul brood. If you had one little tiny spot like this, maybe you're okay. But if you see a few frames like this, you probably, and I think these days you have to get a feed directive from a vet to get the antibiotic, but there are antibiotics for European foul brood. Normal or abnormal? Yep. And why? I think that's the same picture I used before. Yeah, I think we've seen that one before, but that's not in the right spot and it's not the right color, right? There's European foul brood again. Again, a pretty bad case of it. Sunken cappings again in a few spots. Normal or abnormal? How many people feel good when they see this photo? Raise your hand. Mainly the experienced beekeepers, because we know this, and notice that it's a lighter colored capping, but you can still tell it's capping, especially when you compare it to the wax. This is a newer frame. And yeah, that's a really nice brood pattern. And again, some open cells, so maybe they cleared out some diseased ones. Normal or abnormal? Normal. Yep. So see, I don't see any larva that's not in the right shape. See how they're all C-shaped? Now, this one, they have a lot of royal jelly in the bottom, but it's the right color, you know, and this is actually a sign of a hive that's doing really well. I mean, they're doing well enough that these larvae are all really well fed, really, really wet brood. Normal or abnormal? Again, that's just a mature queen cell. This is packed pollen, and that is packed pollen. You may have thought, oh, that's brood. And you'll see things like this, you know, from a distance. You need to get in sometimes and figure out what is that in that one little cell. But, you know, in this case, I'm pretty sure that's just pollen. This is just a bunch of queen cells. It's on the edge of what was the brood nest, so that's not uncommon to see them in that kind of half moon shape on the edge of the brood nest when they have to raise a queen in an emergency situation, or sometimes a supersedure. Normal or abnormal? Okay, good. That one's a little bit tricky because it's not discolored. And this is one that I just recently came across. This is off a Bee Informed Partnership webpage. So they're pointing to this jagged edge where the brood has been exposed and uncapped. And this is actually the developing bee's head, and it's way smaller than it should be. And then this is what it progresses to. This is sac brood. Normal or abnormal? Normal, but queen cells. You see the queen larva down in there? And this is another photo where you have to account for the fact the sunlight in this picture, the sunlight's going through that wax queen cell. That's why it's a little bit yellow. If you were out there and could tip it and get the sun to shine in it, you could see that's a shiny white healthy larva. Normal or abnormal? Normal. And that's, again, pretty well-fed, healthy looking brood. Normal or abnormal? Yep. So that's American foul brood, and this is a pretty severe case. Here again, it's something I hadn't seen before. See the little dots of moisture? There's one there that's actually on the outside of a wax capping. That's another one there that's on the outside of the wax capping. So this is a pretty far progressed state of American foul brood. This American foul brood is the bad one that you pretty much have to burn the colony. It goes into several different stages, and one of them is a spore stage where they get in the wooden ware and in the wax and in cracks, and it survives for almost forever. Yeah. One of the reasons why it's scary to buy used equipment, because it's hard to detect. Normal or abnormal? Okay, tell me why. Holes in the cap? Yep. Yeah, that one's sunken. That one's open and sunken. That one's sunken. Those have some brown sludge in the bottom, or what's becoming sludge in the bottom. I haven't talked about that. Yeah, so yeah, the American foul brood, if you take this larva, or probably even that one, if you took a toothpick or a stick or something and stuck it in there and stir it up, and then you pull that out, this substance will rope. And I've been fooled before. It's not just like it sticks to it a little bit. It'll literally come out, I guess, about an inch. I've seen other things that will start to come out of the cell or like a quarter of an inch. I'm like, oh no. And I called Andy Joseph and he's like, no, it's like an inch or better for American foul brood. It's that ropey, that stringy. I didn't see any good pictures on that. I need to add some to these slides. Normal or abnormal? You what? Normal. Yep. Dave, that's one of your frames, I think. One of your old frames? That doesn't look too bad. Normal or abnormal? Abnormal. This is what they're now calling parasitic mite syndrome. And there's not necessarily a pathogen or a virus associated with it, but I think you mentioned it earlier, when the mites get so bad and the bees are just chewing down all kinds of larvae trying to get rid of them, you can actually see a mite here. And the rest of these, like this one looks okay, but this one, I think there's a mite up there and it's been chewed down. This one's been chewed down. That one's been chewed down. That one looks like it's really kind of dehydrating. I don't see any evidence on the cappings. So it's mainly in these open brood that they've chewed up, but not so much any evidence in the cappings. Could be, yep. Normal or abnormal? Pretty much depends on your perspective. It's normal brood, but there's capped drone brood right there. Yep. Any guesses? Normal. You're getting it. Yep. There's European foul brood again, and again a bad case of it, and a terrible spotty pattern. All right, that's all that I've got. I think maybe I have it. So if you go to beinformed.org or beinformed.org blog, they have a nice search at the top. Why can't I get to it? Was it? There's a search button on top of the blog that I was actually trying to show you. I've recently discovered it and found that it's pretty handy. You can pretty much search for anything. Thank you. There's blog. It's not. I don't know. There we go. I had to go full screen. I don't know why. So there's a search button or a search bar here, and they've been posting to this blog for, I don't know, 10 years. So best management practices is a good one to search on. I just looked at that today. Any disease. So you hear about chalk brood, search here for chalk brood. That's where a lot of these pictures came from. And then there's also an explanation of what to look for, what you're seeing. So any of the brood diseases that you come across that you don't know about, this is a good resource to check them out. I actually work as a contract programmer for Bee Informed Partnership. So I have to warn people that means they think I'm a pretty good programmer, not that I'm a good beekeeper, but I do work for Bee Informed Partnership. And like I said, I've been working for them for just over a year. I just found this search. So that's one of the things I'm going to bring up at the next staff meeting is why isn't this search like dead center on the homepage? Because people are looking for information, and the more convenient you make it, the more use people get out of it. But this is a good one. So use it. Any questions on any of that? A lot? So more information for you to digest at home is probably what you need at this point. All right,
The
good.
weather is bad, we have 2 weeks of rain.
2 weeks of rain, okay?
Can't you just feed your bees?
Yeah, sure. So especially like, let's say you get your nuke or your package this spring and it rains for 2 weeks, you're gonna have to feed them. I mean, you're gonna need to feed them anyway, but yeah. You're feeding them right in the hive, so they don't have to go outside to get that and use it, yeah. If it's 2 weeks of rain in the middle of the summer, you know, if you're able to check on them when it's not raining and you decide that the stores are going down, yeah, you could feed them. You usually wouldn't have to. You usually could wait until the weather cleared up. Yeah. Yeah, they will. Yep. Yep. You'll find sometimes in the spring, we'll get a cold, rainy spell, and then it'll warm up and you'll see bee poop all over the outside or just outside of the hive. It's because they had brood. They got confined for that week when it was cold, so they were having to eat a lot and feed this brood, and they couldn't go outside and go to the bathroom, and that will, it's not the dysentery or the nosema that you'll hear about, but it's diarrhea, it's bee diarrhea. So you'll see that, you know, the cold weather will keep them confined, and then when they can get out, they get rid of that. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Well, I'm gonna stop this, maybe.